for joining us here today. I got quite a shock when I walked in. I was told that I was going to be chairing this meeting at such a short notice, so I will do my best. We have called this meeting, and we're delighted to have amongst us Myrdal from Sweden, who is a writer on political affairs. He has been a long-standing member of the movement, of communist movement in Europe and indeed throughout the world. He has had very close connections with the movement in India from a very early age. And he has written extensively about the movement. His latest writing is Head Start Over India, which was released last year. And he has come over here, and we have held this discussion, presentation over this book and his understanding of where the movement is, how it is developed, and where it is possibly likely to go. So, without further ado, let me ask you to welcome Myrdal.
Dear friends, dear comrades, I'm very grateful that so many of you could have come in such a beautiful day. And there are so many other things to do. I also say some words of introduction just about who I am and what I've done. I'm born in 1927, and I grew up partly in Sweden, partly in the United States, or in Geneva, due to my parents were working. In the spring of 1943, when I was 15, going during the war, Sweden was not involved. Sweden was, you had the Germans all around. I applied to become a member of the Swedish Communist Youth League. We were not illegal. The Germans had demanded that we were illegal, but we were, you could say, we were legal or semi-legal. And I worked there, and I took part in the Congress. I reported on the work among the student youth, which meant that I couldn't go back to the United States, of course, to continue my education. And then I worked in the press, communist press. I worked also in the WFDY, as a national representative of the World Federation of Democratic Youth, and so on. And I mainly worked in three fields: youth, culture, and peace, as we said that time, later on, that time period. In 1953, I decided to become a sort of full-time writer, discussed with the Congress, and so then I've been working as a writer in many fields, and then written a horrible amount of books in all different fields: literature, art, politics, what have you. As far as my connection with India is concerned, it began I got married in 1948 when I was 21, and my father-in-law was Carly Ghosh, who was in London then, and he had been in the New Zealand and in the so-called Bengal terrorist scene in 1930, so many people, and he of course told me very much, and we discussed very much about India. He has passed away now, my wife also. And then I had, during his in the international youth work in the WFDY, I had always worked together also with Indian communists, and one of them became rather close, Sarada Mitra, who was from the Youth League, Communist Youth League at that time. I'm not talking about a long time ago. And in 1958, I came to India, and I stayed there. I had Delhi as my base, you could see, traveling around and meeting many people. Just to conclude this political, and I stayed in India based in India until '62, when I went to China to write a report from a Chinese village. I stayed there, then I have that changed. I mean, the experience of Asia and India and also China, of course, changed my perspectives. I also understood that even though I was a communist, I had been Eurocentric. I had not really understood the realities of imperialism. And then I was traveling in the Soviet Central Asia, and I had good friends among those who were later on discovered. And I wrote a book on Soviet Turkmenistan that was not anti-Soviet, no, but it took up the very deep real problems at that time. It was immediately condemned from Moscow as I really. And at the same time, but not by the party in Sweden. I mean, the party Shaman wrote a realistic and good discussion. But at the same time, I left the Swedish Communist Party, but not as a renegade. I discussed it very clearly with them. There were three main points. That the Swedish party, like most of the European parties of that time, did not understand the realities of anti-colonialism, anti-imperialism, and the real oppression. First. The second, that they did not understand that there was a very real degeneracy in the Soviet Union. I mean, not only problems, but very real degeneracy. And thirdly, of course, that I consider the policies in Sweden too soft. That did not, I once was saying this, that did not mean that I became a renegade or hostile. I was even introduced to the 1965 party conference when I was to speak as a non-party communist, which was, and I've continued since then as a non-party communist. If you understand me. I just want to give you this as the background. Now, I came to India in 1958, in February, I think it was very early, 1958. And we were driving, I and my wife at that time had been driving down from Sweden. And India became a very it changed me very completely. And you know very well this, or you all know very well this situation. Everything you say about India is probably correct. I mean, you have all the culture, the remnant, the monuments, all that is there. You have the great national culture, and also you have the high intellectual. I mean, if you the intellectual level in India, in Calcutta, in Kolkata, in Mumbai, Delhi, etc., is of course on a much higher level than you have in Sweden. In many ways, the India that I came to, you can see it as in one way France before 1789. That's to say, on the one hand, the very high cultural and intellectual level, and on the other hand, the most horrible oppression. And you had also the same thing, you know, with I mean, India is the only place in the world where I've eaten on gold, massive gold plates, and the host, you know, as you told me that the problem with India was there were so many poor, and the poor only consume, they do not produce. You understand? So this was my first, and it has remained, you know, the social structure of India. Another thing which I of course came to understand quite easily, that is that British India, South Asia, or India is not a nation with minority problems. You can say France in Europe has minorities, but in India that is not India. That is a multinational state. That is to say, it is like the old Russia or former Soviet Union or others, where there are different nations, not only nationalities of them. And also, but all this you will know. When I was, and I also had, of course, different contacts, also with those people, those comrades who were, you know, at that time the Indian movement was beginning to split up, and I had different. But in 1980, when we were back in 1980, I was with my wife and my daughter, Eva Myrdal. She worked and studied as an archaeologist in India and Sri Lanka, and now is head of the Far Eastern Museum. She is still very good in the anti-imperialist movement, etc. But anyway, we had discussions, and then we met in Mumbai, Chandrapur Reddy, and he talked with me. He said I had to go. He took us to Andhra, and we went to what you could call underground. They led us underground to Andhra, and we spent some time there with armed squads at that time, and we wrote about it. I wrote about it in a book called India Waits, that then was published in India, in Hyderabad, in English, and on some other languages. And at that time, 1980, there were not so many where they described this. And that was, of course, that I done this book, published this, and that was the reason why on New Year's Eve in 2010, when I was sitting dinner with my present wife, daughter, the telephone rang, and it was from the CPIM, and they wanted me to come to Dandakarania in a fortnight's time to meet them and talk. They had together with Gautam Navlaka. And that of course, I said yes. My difficulty is, of course, my knees are rather, you know, when you're 86, your knees tend to become a little bit bad. Anyway, that can be done. So I went on. I was fortunate because I had received a grant from the Swedish authorities, Swedish literary authorities, to hold a lecture in Delhi on August Strindberg and modernism. So I could use that, you know, for tickets, etc. And then when I came to Delhi, the comrades took care of me, and I could go, and then we went to Dandakarania, And I must say one thing which is maybe personal, but anyway, you know, these young comrades, these young Adivasi comrades, they were extremely nice and careful. They treated me as an old grandfather, you know, with his bad knees. You know, I could walk along, but I could not walk as quickly. And when it came to very difficult places, they carried me. I mean, and at the end, it was a little bit difficult journey, but anyway, at the end, in the evening when we arrived up in the hills, some people came out of the dark, drinking tea, and we were talking. And that was, I understood, the General Secretary and small friends, and we had started to have long discussions on. They tried to explain the situation for me in different ways. In this book, you have the book I wrote about this is in two parts. One part is sort of the personal description and discussion, and the second part, you know, they gave me transcripts of what had been said. You know, we had to burn our notes, etc., and got a little what do you call it? You know, a chip that you could swallow if anything happened. But I got some printed. I got some material. I mean, there are different reports. They said the enemy has them anyway, and we got these transcripts, and they said you can you can see them as our official party. And what I did in the book was I gave these transcripts at the end. So that is, I divided it between my discussions and personal things, and that which is exactly there. And I must say, I can say, first on the personal level, I was very impressed by their friendliness, the fellowship, and the very open and nice discussions. For instance, it took some time before I understood that Gunnar Party was the you know, he was the only said yes. It took me some time to understand, because the discussions, the level of discussions, was very commonly friendly. The whole leading group had an extremely friendly. They did not behave, you know, rigid, what you could call East European way, which I have often seen. And they were helpful. And then I must say, and you can see it yourself, the discussions were very, very frank, very, very open, also about the problems. The general view they had of the Indian history. One thing was that, you know very well that the movement had been extremely split. First you had the old party, the old movement, which was, of course, had been dominated also by the difference between the Indian Communist Party and the Chinese Communist Party was, of course, that the Indian was not able to take the old party I'm talking about, a really national analysis. The Chinese did, but for instance, in India, the party as such that time was not able to really get across that they were struggling against the German and Japanese fascists, but that you had the British imperialism here. So it was a very complicated thing. You couldn't only say that you were allies with the British. The Mao and the Chinese were able to see it in a much more double way with this. No, but unfortunately, that of course led to the fact that when it came to the big, we could call it the Quit India movement, Gandhi initiated, but then grew up to that. They were not able to enter it and steer it in the correct direction. They stood aside, which meant, of course, that they also lost the possibility at independence. You saw that later on in the Telangana, which was a glorious struggle, but the party was unable to continue. They refused, and they even sent a delegation to Moscow. That I knew before I went to Nanakania, to talk with Stalin and ask him. And he, of course, well, he just said some generalities about guerrilla war. But I mean, it was the sort of thing you can't do. I mean, you can't be the leader of a party for a large part of humanity and ask somebody to advise. You have to make that decision yourself. But what they did, and I remember, they explained, and I have a case. They explained the development and how from the first Naxalite movement, how they could go on and how they could overcome their difficulties. They were very clear. He spoke very clearly. There were mistakes that were made in the beginning. You know, things like saying Chairman Mao is our chairman. Chinese reacted against that, but I mean, you can't have foreign like that. And that they corrected. You had the annihilations, and they're quite they're explainable, and this type of story, it's very explainable in this social situation. You had them in Russia, you had them in Spain, you can have them everywhere. And Lenin's brother was, of course, was on that line. He was, of course, hanged by the Tsar. But as Lenin said about it, on the one hand, of course, they were very heroic in that struggle. At the same time, it was not enough. But you can see both things. And also, Ganapati discussed that at the beginning there was underestimation of the mass movement, the legal and semi-legal mass movements. Why I'm saying this? I mean, this is very clear. I mean, that's to say, they very honestly discussed what they had done, the mistakes and the reason why, and how they come out of it. And also that they had overcome the split. I mean, the splits, you know, it's not specifically Indian, but it's also the reason for the splits, the reason for all these divisions. Sarapul already had talked to me. I can come back to how they look at him. Talked to me about that. And he had said that you must understand that when we sort of tried to get out of the sort of the traditional party that was going on, none of us was on a national level. We were all sort of local leaders, and this also contributed to the fact that I don't know how many of you were in India or around India at that time in the beginning. You know, as a number, I can't say how many, but anyway, 17, 20 different organizations, and some of them also struggling against each other, even physically. But to overcome this step by step, and uniting, they were able to unite, and they had the two big groups. The smaller ones had been united, but two big groups left, and they had also violent clashes. To overcome this and see what was uniting them, which was a long process, and that led them to when Gautam went over. I could not walk as much as he could. So and they didn't want me to follow when he went over to another region, because it would be a daily. They had to cross some main roads where it would have been difficult to have me along. If I had been slow, well, they could have been taken. But they gave me then the material to read, all these reports they had. And they said, you can take them because the enemy has already got them. Which I can understand, but though I don't think they are officially printed anywhere in India. What impressed me more was, of course, the very clear discussions they had, and they are given have them on the national question. What does it mean to say that India is a multi-national, that there are different international, not nationalities, but nations in India? That refers, because if you're communist, you have to go back to what Lenin took a fight about that in the summer of 1917. The Bolshevik, he made a change in the Bolshevik party statutes, saying that you have to make it clarify that the nations had the right to secede, struggle for real secession. Not that they had to, but that they had to. And he also at that time used the Swedish-Norwegian experiences as an example. You know, Sweden and Norway were unified up to 1905 from the Napoleonic Wars, and Norway wanted independence, and the Swedish upper class, of course, wanted to keep them with violence, and the socialists and Young Socialist League managed to. Well, they were very, very harsh. They even said that in case of a war, I mean, the Swedish officers would be shot before they could give any order. I mean, they really said things that you can't say, or that were extremely illegal. But but they did not decide over the Norwegians. They did not say that we as Swedish socialists demand that you do this and that. No. The Norwegians, they took their independence with the help of the Swedish, and they elected for a monarch. The Swedish Young Socialists would not have elected for a king, but that was the sake of the Norwegians. It was not for us to intervene. I think that is to say, and this means, as you know, very much in India. You can say that they discussed the right of the Kashmiris and the others for national independence. It was struggle for national independence, and that this struggle for national independence is a part of the broad democratic struggle. And also, on the political side, they discussed. I mean, how do we look? How should you look at others, at the other organizations? What they said was that we decided we are not the dominant. We're the biggest. We're not. There are others. I think we think that they could be wrong, but they were not enemies. The Chandrapur Reddy group, which I've been along with in 1980, I met. So they have been divided, but I met remnant of them in Hyderabad. Later on, I came back to India, and I met them, and they were not enemies. You could say they were And so they were considered not as enemies, but that because they were halfway legal. You probably know how they were. But for instance, in 1980, when we were in the restricted areas and they were smuggled into them, we stayed several houses. We stayed also at a house where there was a young girl running around. And when I met her again, she was now head of the Sandapura Reddy group, women's. What I mean is, they accept these. There are differences. There are differences of opinion, great differences, but they are not hostile. Even if you take, we discussed also, you have all these, but as Azad wrote, he didn't want to enumerate all the organizations they consider to be positive, because it's a McCarthy situation in India, and if they say this organization is considered good by the CPI Maoists, then they will react. But what is important is that they honestly want to try, and they honestly want to, which is of course according to the Marxist and Maoist ideologies. They want to do a broad united France, cooperate also with the national independence groups, with the democratic, and also. If you take the Indian context, if you make United France, united work in the cities or otherwise, you also, of course, work together with the petty bourgeoisie. They are not enemies, so they can be allies in this broad new democratic coalition. I mean, they were very, very careful about this, which I thought was good. No, that what I think is of course doesn't mean anything, but I reacted. I thought this was good, and I had an extremely good impression of it. And we also discussed things that are very, very touching and different. One of the things that communists, unfortunately, have not understood very much about, that is cultural, religious and national differences. But they were, and here Maoists, they are working in Adivasi areas and building up them. As you know, there are very different traditions. And if you take India, you have this, and among the Adivasis there are very specific different traditions, and how to handle them. With handle, I mean that if you're working to erect a new state structure, you also have to see the contradictions in her. And I can take up some of them. They were in this tradition. You had the Gothel tradition, where the young people, the young boys and young girls of the village, they collected in a hut, and they had a little bit different in different places, sexual liberty. Now, during the young age, some people like Verrier Elvin, if you read him, he was extremely fascinated by this. The things were not so easy though, and there were problems in this. Also, when foreigners came, and how were they to handle this? The main thing was that the women of the tribes, they demanded a change. It was their thing. Let me take another thing which is very touchy in all our countries, in all our customs, the marriage customs. in these areas, what you might in Dadakarania, a man and a woman of the same surname or the same lineage could not marry. That should be incestuous. As in, it's not so in Sweden, but it's so in many countries. And how, in fact, people don't always follow the rules. So here at in the party, a man and a woman, they fell in love over this. And how was the party to react? They tried to look up. The Chinese had a certain tradition, a little bit like that, but they followed that. But in the end, they came to the conclusion that it was not possible. It would create too great a popular conflict. And this is a very, it was a very refined way of taking one's responsibility. The party couldn't just come in and do it. Another such thing was that there was among the tradition, like you have in many countries, that menstruating women cannot stay in the village. Now, in the women's movement, some of the more radical, they wanted to not only demand this, but to enforce it, which created a tremendous uproar in the traditional village community. And the party, of course, discussed it, but they did not, if you take it from a Marxist-Leninist point of view, you could go in and say yes and no, because they had to work with respect. And these things are very, these things are go very deep. I mean, if we know it very well from Europe, from different countries, we have different traditions. The party are working for goes in sort of trampling down. Just great fun. I think they were extremely clever. They were extremely. They thought through these things very well. The same thing about. There are, as you very well know, it's a very, and the government has used different methods, and you have all these horrors of mass rape and mass killing. You have all this. But what are you to do with it? But the party, of course, does not want killing. Certain people have been killed for grave reasons. I'll come back to that. I've seen it also in 1980. But even in a case where government agents had managed to get hold of several people and make them informers, and some people in the village wanted them killed. The party said no, we have to wait, we have to take this carefully. They can change. The idea that the Maoists go around killing, wanting to kill, no. But there are realities, and I know them. I know them from 1980 when I saw them. I also talked with a woman comrade who had been responsible for the work in Andhra. But what are you to do? Here you have a Dora who reigns over the village totally, and he doesn't only. And then he had, the story was very simple. He had taken all the electricity to put bulbs in his own house, and one man, a Muslim, had protested. So immediately he had gone out with his gundas and walked to the man's home, raped raped his wife, and then in the morning the family had to go through the village with his soiled clothes to him. You understand the situation? And at that moment the party intervened. I mean, really, I mean, and at that there was a people's court. I mean, you understand the situation, and you understand also what the people demanded. Absolutely, they demanded that this criminal had to die. Well, that's to say, there are such cases. I know some other cases. I've seen some of it in 1918. I heard about it today. But it does not mean that the party condones killings. But in certain cases, it becomes necessary. Well, if you know the situation in India, you know the situation here. There can be such cases. But what I think was the main, then what the party did, which I think was correct, was of course to get raise literacy, and we had discussions about this. What do you do? One thing is to raise literacy, yes, but if you have a population speak its own language, and this language has never had any script, which line do you go? Do you go the line of Atatürk in Turkey to Latinize Turkish, but in India, where you have anyhow a number of scripts, what should you do? They were discussing. I pointed out that even we in Sweden, a small language, small country, we have three different in the alphabet signs that we don't have in English, for instance. You know, the A with a circle over it, or the A with two dots over it, the O with two dots, sounds that are not usually in most of the languages. I mean, I was not, they did, there was a discussion. I mean, I mean, this is a very realistic discussion. You can all of you think about it. If you were in this position, it's not an easy way out. I mean, they were standing also in front of difficult questions. The thing which they, of course, were very, but they had a literature. They organized literature. They used, of course, in this area, in Andhra Pradesh and in Telugu. I'm sorry.
You want to sit down?
Sit down. Sit down.
Excuse me. In Andhra, you have a tremendous popular culture. You have a great literary tradition, of the revolutionary tradition, and that they were developing. Well, I know this. I came back to India. I can tell you that very late. But anyway, I mean, for instance, Gadar is a very great poet, a very great figure. I had known him in 1980, and I met him again. And they are developing much on that. They are developing much on that level. They are sort of taking over much. They are creating inside the new state structure, because it's not a liberated zone. That is to say, you can say it's a guerrilla. It's in a guerrilla zone, and they probably are more careful now, because they didn't care to check me if I had this. I did have it, but it was not on anyway. And as you know, if you carry one of these, the police can follow you exactly where you are. That I think they have done. They are checking up now. They were discussing what they ought to do. Very many journalists asked to come. And of course some of them might be bad, some of them might be trying to send material, but in principle my advice, in that case I gave an advice, that was to take them in even if they're bad, it doesn't matter so very much. So you Chinese have the same situation. But if they report honestly what you are doing, how you are working, what you're doing with health, what are your real problems, that will be just good. Now they also what they also were discussing was of course the front in the cities, etc. And how they were to work, and that is mainly of course through the semi-league. They had the totally undercover work with the semi-legal mass movements, and they tried to establish contact with Espany. They have their perspectives. They're working with a long perspective. Of course, they didn't say in X years we'll do this. No. But I mean, they are working a long-range perspective. Remember that there are quite a number of years since the Naxalite uprising. I mean, this is. But they have decided that now. Of course, they, as you also said, if they make mistakes, they can cross them dead. I had intense respect for the young comrades. If you take the Adivasi young woman comrades, I mean, they were extremely good. And as far as I could see, I read different other things, but as far as I could see, the relations were normal and healthy. Now, well, I can say much. Now, when I came back, I came back to Delhi, and I made my lecture, and then I had another lecture in Mumbai, and but then I began to feel bad. Dadakaraniya is not an especially healthy place. And many of our comrades have died. You have the malaria, there is a legma to go through that. And Gautam did get it. He survived because he came under hospital. I didn't get that, but I got something, so I couldn't go. I should go and go to Hyderabad and other places, but I couldn't. I had to go home. It took some time before I could begin writing, because I don't know what it was. I was bleeding, and I was, what that was. They couldn't find. But then I wrote, and the book was of course immediately my Swedish publisher. Not to publish it, and he did. I wrote it in English, but he did. So the Swedish, Norwegian, German, Italian publishers. But no British publisher wanted to touch it. But in India, they wanted to publish it, and so they did publish it. And so I was invited back to the Kolkata book fair, and I knew there could be trouble with the government, because as you know, you're not allowed as a foreigner. I don't think you're allowed as an Indian either to go to the restricted areas. It says so in your passport. That's forbidden. So to go to Dadakaraniya was of course contrary to the visa. So I did another thing. I didn't just take an ordinary tourist visa. I applied for a specific business visa for visiting the Kolkata book fair and presenting the book. I had letters from the publishers and other letters on this. That visa cost a lot more, but on the other hand it was valid only for a month, I think. But on the other hand, I was protected. I mean, I had got a visa for this book, which meant that, of course, they could have kicked me out already then, but normally, well, I was legal. It took some discussion when I arrived at immigration, but they let me in. Though, I mean, you had to be very careful. The police had to know exactly where I stayed, and I told the conference I was going to speak at different places, but I said I will speak on the book. I will speak on general things, but I have a book here. That is the reason for speaking. In that way, you keep inside the visa regulations. I mean, you can say this seems like formalism, but no, one should be a little bit careful. I could say what I like. Anyway, I was in Madan, I was in Hyderabad, I was in Kolkata, I was in Delhi speaking. Though afterwards, of course, the Indian government stood up in the parliament and banned me for India, and said, which was, I think, very fantastic, that I had advised Ghana Party, as if I had told Ghana Party what to do. On the one hand, he wouldn't have accepted it. We discussed the reasons why he but on the other hand, I wouldn't dream of such a thing. Now, as far as the book goes, unfortunately, I see there are, there are always printers' errors in all books. And as I had sent, was working electronically, I didn't see the proofs to correct it. Certain things, when you read it, are simple. That is to say, there are a number of quotes where it might be difficult to say where the quote begins and ends, but with a little thinking you can understand that, even though there are no marks. But there were also some things, some misprints that I think are more important and where one should look out. And I'll tell you, it's like this. I'm talking about that Marx and Engels were not inspired. That's to say that their words were not. They acted and wrote during the struggles of their time. Therefore, when Engels published the third volume of Marx's Capital in 1894, he pointed out that Marx did not write definitions, but developments. And then he continues here, Marx had protested against this during his lifetime. No, there is, of course, as you understand, a sentence missing. That's to say, what Marx had protested against was the definition Marxism as such, above everything else. But that we have to, that you must understand is a misprint. And another thing, there are, I think, 3 such mistakes. Oh yes, here Ghana Party is saying, when you, Jan Myrdal, had come here in 1980, the party was still undergoing this problem. It was only another 67 years than proper leadership. As you understand, this is a misprint. It must be 6 to 7 years. And I'm just telling you this because this is not unusual. You have these things in all. Oh yes, it is a little bit more serious. Here a new word has appeared. What I'm saying, I'm discussing the fact that we all are writing and living inside our own cultural traditions. I mean, depends upon where I of course have a Lutheran tradition in the back of my head. I mean, which you can see in the way I write. And I'm saying that Marx and Engels, there are more biblical allusions. You find them in this text. But then they continue. Then in the works of German philosophers like Hegel, which is absolutely wrong. What I said, there are more biblical allusions than allusions to Hegel. You see, there are certain such difficulties, but that can be I'll try to get them changed. But that's also a difficulty of working when you are in different continents. But otherwise, I tried to make it readable. The first part is personal. Part of it is very personal. When I explain the very simple things, you know, if you are 86 or 84, as it was, and you sleep on the ground, and how do you get up? How do you stand up? If you have nothing to hold on, and if you have to go out in the middle of the night to pee, how do you get up? You can't. That is to say, you can tell the young comrades, I mean, please help me. They can take care of that. Well, which they did. I mean, as they said, you are like grandfather. So it's on the one hand personal, but also these personal details have a political implication, and the political implication is, of course, the way. Partly it is in the different Indian cultural traditions, how you view the aged. Unfortunately, in Sweden, it's harsher. I mean, if you come to Sweden, you will find that if an old man, I or somebody else walking, little comes into a tram car, the ones standing up will be first, possibly second generation immigrant children. Well, you understand, these are cultural traditions. Well, there's very much to say, and I could talk, I think, very much. But I would prefer to answer questions.
Okay, let's open the meeting to the floor. Let's perhaps questions and comments. It's really fast.
I think before we start, I mean, I think Jan Myrdal had a very difficult journey coming here, and we've arranged this meeting with Stop the War as well, and he spoke there as well yesterday. I think therefore we should all contribute something towards the expenses, and would it be proper that somebody goes round?
Okay, yeah, that would be great. All contributions.
His flight was cancelled, so then, because he was so committed to coming to the meeting, he felt he had to book another one because they couldn't guarantee the plane. There was no plane in Gothenburg, it hadn't arrived, and they couldn't guarantee it would arrive the next day. So he had to book a more expensive flight. So in fact, what we were manageable expenses have increased to something nearly £1,000. So we are going to give whatever they can, please, and help us, because we don't want you to be out of pocket.
Okay. Has somebody got a collection bag, box?
Yeah, inside limits. I mean, I ought to do something myself.
That's fine. Whilst we're doing that, whilst we're doing that quietly, has anybody got a question? I think we'll wait for that to go on. I'll put £10 on
give me £10. I'll pay for you. £10 for myself and you.
I feel a little bit bad and stupid about this. It's only that I thought that I had either choice of trying to get another ticket, which was difficult, or not coming at all. But I also say that I should. It's not all of you. If you have, it's good, but otherwise I'm coming. But there are many things I would like to say about the Indian, about the struggle. I have not talked about one of the main things, and of course the region here, Nanakarnia, is, as you well know, extremely rich in mineral wealth, which means that you have the whole international capital interested.
After us.
Yes, working there. Which also means that you will have the different capitalist groups, and if they suddenly have a big campaign, international campaign against the terrorism in this area, you will also get, of course, support from not only the United States and Great Britain, but from Sweden, from France, wherever, because they own this country. We are. This is also one of the contradictions we have to understand, and what we can do in our countries, what we are doing, for instance, in Sweden. We are organizing solidarity organization, meetings and everything. But on what basis? There are some people who want to organize this on the basis of people's war and a gun, but you won't get very great. You won't get a very great following in Sweden on that. That's one side. But also, the thing is very much broader. When we organize the solidarity work with Palestine, Kashmir, and everything, you will also have other groups, other political groups, other religious groups, even Christians. If you have even the Swedish bishop and archbishop becomes involved in the question of Palestine independence. I hope you understand. I mean, so the solidarity work with India, with oppressed people of India, is in giving information, and in case there will be Swedish involvement on the side of the government or monopoly capital against terrorism, we have to act against that. So that is the way, and they are doing it is quite a nice, if you go on the net, and I think it's called Indian Solidarity or India Solidarity or something like that. You will find this homepage. It's quite well. Certain parts of it are in English, of course, but it's quite well done.
I have a question if nobody has. Just to start. Communist struggles and communist movements in the Western world there's very little to be seen. And you see that sharp revolutionary struggles are happening in the third world countries such as India, Colombia, Brazil, and Philippines. Is it necessary that the revolutionary struggles have to emanate from there and then the Western working class then follow it? Or is there a possibility of a revolutionary movement emanating, starting in the Western world?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, this is a very, very good question. But remember that we had in our countries, the Western world, we had very definite defeats, great defeats, and we can go back. I mean, if we go to understand the question, go back to the end of the Civil War in the United States, and after that, you had a period of very increased class struggle. And the first international had been moved to Europe, as far as I remember, and they also led it. That in its turn led to the extremely sharp repression of the 1870s. If you go to the press of that time, and I made a TV series on that one, you have the extreme propaganda against agitators, against like this. So the more revolutionary American U.S. labor movement was crushed at that time. Then, in the second wave, you have at the beginning of the 19th century, you also have a very rising class struggle in the United States, and you have the very strong movements at that time. I quote Jack London, but I mean it was very strong, and you had the rise of the IWW, which was very, very militant and strong, and they were crushed during the First World War, really crushed. You know, where they were put in jail as German agents, etc. And then it was in abeyance until the 1930s, when you had a new wave, the new CIA and all this, and which also had a great impact on the Roosevelt years. But after the war, after the Second World War, you know, this was also violently crushed. That was the situation in the United States, so that has been, we have had this. So what you see today is, of course, according to my opinion, a lack. I mean, you have the class struggle is not something that is an idea or thought of. It really is. You see, if you take Portugal, if you take Greece, if you take Ireland, if you take Great Britain or Sweden, you see that the oppression, the economic and the struggle. It is, but it's often, and it's, but it's not. There is no clear leadership, which is unfortunate. And you, at the same time, you have the rise of reactionary fascism. And you know, fascists, they are often taking over slogans and other things from the left. They're using this. But you can see the rise in Greece, in Hungary, also in Sweden, and all, in France, where the Le Pen or his daughter, they are very efficient. They have taken over much of the slogans and the works of the Communist Party that are sort of caved in. That's dangerous. That you can and the small groups that are left and that are good. We have in Sweden, we have and who are, I think, honest and good. As yet, they have not been able to create a leadership of a spontaneous mass movement that you see growing up the whole time. So I think the question is, and of course one part of that is the total dominance of the media. I mean, all the media are singing one tune in these things. But I don't think it's hopeless. If I think it was hopeless, I wouldn't do anything. I think you're right. But I don't think I think it has been grievous defeats. You had a grievous defeat of the European working class in 1914. Against its voice with the First World War, when the Second International caved in, and you had other such defeats. But the history is long. What I took up there was the experience of the Paris Commune, which I've been working on. which are still sort of valid. I took them up in Donna Canada.
I think, Jan, probably better you sit down because.
No, I think better when I stand. No, it doesn't matter. It was just that I got.
What's your lean over the?
No, I stand. I'm waiting for questions.
Any questions?
Yeah.
After you've done it.
Okay. You said that India is a place of many nationalities. What does it mean in concrete terms?
Well, I didn't say nationalities because that means minorities. I said nations. I mean, Kashmir, the Kashmiri. I think they are a nation. You have other nations or close inclinations in Tamil, and Tamil is not a nationality in India. It's a nation. If the way they decide to go, that is another thing. You understand? I mean, I'm not saying that India has to be immediately split up into 18 or 20 nations. That's not at all what I'm saying. That is for them to decide. But the question is that if you take a country like France, well, you can say you have the Basque, you have the Norman, you have the German speaking, but they are small minorities. In principle, you can talk about a unified France with certain minority problems. But India is not a unified India with smaller nationality problems. There are nations, and if you have large oppression, as you have in Kashmir, for instance, the national movements tend to develop to create an independent state. But that is for them to decide. But what I mean is that we have to see the difference between the South Asia and the countries in Europe, in South Asia and India. You have not a unified country or state. You have different possible states. It's closer to old Russia or that way. That was what I meant.
Before Farid and Ravi, the collection is £181. Thank you very much.
No, then, comrades, I must say, I hope you understand. I mean, this is not what I'm grateful. I'm grateful because, after all, normally I am a pensioner. I mean, I'm living on the pensions and books. But what I must say that you won't get rich on books in.
Not especially the kind of book you write.
Yeah, I think the world situation has changed now, a bit before. Now, what's your impression of that movement which you have been there, and their success and open in other fields like trade union and other things?
I think they are working. None of us we don't have crystal balls to see the future, but they have. I think they are. I have great respect for them, and I think they are working in a good way. At the same time, as I said, the world situation is also very, very strange. On the one hand, it's very easy to say that U.S. imperialism and other imperialism are that they are on the way down. They are paper tigers, but with very real teeth.
Real time.
And if you look back in history, you'll see that the Spanish Empire, it took a long time declining, and what you see from the wars going on. I mean, you had the imperial colonial wars. The United States imperialism, I could say, I think it's overreached itself. But with the wars they have now in West Asia, towards Central Asia, they can continue. And you must also remember that imperialism is not simple. It can work two ways. It can build up Americans, US imperialists, not Americans, I'm sorry, I shouldn't say that, because America is much more. But the US imperialists, they built up Al-Qaeda. They started it, they financed it. And then they started this war against terrorists, and now when they need Al-Qaeda in another way, they're financing it again in certain ways. I mean, nothing is simple. It's the way I said yesterday, speaking about Palestine and Israel. Remember, the United States, they have no wars, they have no, imperialism has no friends. They use Israel for their interest. If they came to a situation when it was in their interest to change, they would change. I hope you understand what I mean. I'm not saying they will be better or worse, just that is the way imperialism works. That's one thing. The second is that it will, and that you know very well, it will always try to get conflicts going. The conflict between Shia and Sunni is, as you know, very, very old by now. But in Iraq, people lived together. I mean, I know my son-in-law is from Iraq. They live together. It is only now when the Americans they trying to get this conflict going, and they have no hopes whatsoever. These two things will make the coming decades rather difficult. Of course difficult. They are, but at the same time, you have on the one hand the rising popular movements against it, which you also see all around the world and in Europe. On the other hand, the way the US imperialism is working also with all these eavesdropping and all this. So it's a difficult situation, but it's not hopeless.
Ravi, then.
Just following on from the question that Naeem asked about different nations within India, but I'm interested in the role that caste plays, and that the problem of caste discrimination and what must be done to get real progress in India. What would you views on that?
Yes, the caste problem is, the caste is of course very, there I think the Maoists have been doing, they've been saying things more clearly, both about caste and about how you educate the party members. What they are clearly saying is that the caste is nothing superficial. It goes deep. It is placed deep inside, deep inside yourself, and you have to really struggle against this. The old Communist Party of India had a much too superficial. I remember it when we were talking to them, and of course Nehru. He at the end when I met him. When I spoke, I had only one long talk to him. I met him at that time. But that was also about caste. He was furious because the Chinese writer had raised the question of casteism. He behaved as if caste there was no problem any longer. I mean, but I think that the Maoists, as far as I can see, they are, or as far as I remember, they are doing their best. Now, as you well know, this goes very, very deep. You can meet Indian communists, intellectuals, writers, who at the same time the sacred thread is. I mean, they are twice. Well, I mean, this is nothing you just take away. You're saying, but you have to really work, and you have to work with what they are doing to their cadres. They have to work with themselves to really get rid of this. Caste is very, very deep. Though it's not only India. I mean, it's not India is in one way extreme, but you have such tendencies in
Pakistan, Bangladesh.
Oh yes, then you have them in China too. So it's more it's more general, but India is more.
Yes.
Yes, I'm pleased and encouraged to hear from you that a party in India accepted that in India there is a question of multiple nations, not national minorities. This is what we have been discussing or arguing for last long time. But in 1946, CPI identified or classified more than a dozen nations and argued that each nation should have a right to self-determination. And they include Kashmir, Andhra Pradesh, Kerala, Karnataka, Maharashtra, Gujarat, and Central Punjab. I don't know what is the situation, what is the discussion about this specific anyone. But these are the nations identified, accepted by the United CPI before 1947. I don't know what you think of this.
Well, what you can say, but I think that I cannot talk for the CPI Maoists, but what I think they would say that is a question. That is not a question for them to decide. That is a question for each nation to decide. I mean, you can't sit in Sweden or in Birmingham or in Danakani and say that the Tamils should have their own national borders. That is for the Tamils to decide. This was a principal question that Lenin tried to institute in the summer of 1917. He didn't say that they all have to go away. He said that they must have the right, absolute right to do it if they want. If they want to stand together, that's another thing. But I can't talk for the. I can refer to what the Ganapati and others said, but I can't talk for them specifically.
Can I? It's in a way quite amazing that the struggle has developed to this level, and perhaps has it developed this? I mean, how much more oppression resources can the Indian government put in to actually put an end to it? And is that a possibility, or?
Well, remember that the Indian state also has its tradition. You know that there is a legalistic tradition in India that's also strange. You have horrible things happening, but you also have a legalistic tradition, and the state is